Mark from the States, Mark from the States, it's Mark from the United States.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How are we doing today? Mark from the States, of course. I'm doing fantastic. Hope you are as well. Thank you so much for coming today. Oh, I'm so happy when we get to watch a video from Battle Guides. Linus over there, he's a wonderful human. So please, before we start, the links below will take you to this video. This video, Who Was the Last Man, ended on the Western Front, World War I documentary. If you are looking for just awesome documentaries on battles of World War I, World War II, and a bunch of other topics, I encourage you to get over to Battle Guide. They're so well done. We did a video of D-Day, Pegasus Bridge with them, and so many of you enjoyed it. I always enjoy it. We've now covered maybe 2 or 3 of his videos, and they're just outstanding. So, with that said, the links below this beautiful face. I couldn't say that with a straight look. I'm sorry. The links below me here, this dumb head. The links below will take you to this video to where you don't have to hear me talk and gush over Linus over there and the work that him and his team do. And there's also a link that takes you directly to the channel. I've done all the work. Just click on those links. It'll take you right there, and you will be amazed. I promise you, if you have not got into his channel or checked it out, I encourage you to get over there and do it, because they're so good. It's so good. And this, of course, has come requested, which just makes it that much better. You know, a while back, got to talk to him via email, of course. And he gave his blessing for us to learn from his stuff. And I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed if you go over there. So hopefully some of you will go over there and support him. It is so important that you do. They put a ton of work into these videos, right? And, you know, we need to reciprocate the love that they put into their work and get over there and show them that we approve and we love what they do. So get over there, like, subscribe, do the things that make you all so special. They do a great job. Just want to point out that I am drinking my coffee from the mug my son brought me back. When in doubt, if whenever we go on vacation to some place that we'll probably not go back to, or for a long time, we usually get a coffee mug. We've got so many coffee mugs, or a shot glass. We have a collection of shot glasses, which he also got for me. This is actually to his mom. The missus got the coffee mug. It's really cool. And I got the shot glass. So the guy knows his parents pretty well. Speaking of mug, a while back I was sent by one of you a wonderful box of just wonderful, wonderful stuff. But unfortunately, the mug had broke in transport. I still have it, and I still want to put it back together. And in fact, I'm going to do that pretty soon, and I will show you when I do finish. But it's it's just a mug that you can kind of see. It has the flag on it and all that good stuff. But I want to use it, and I can use it for of course, its days of a vessel for liquid is over. But it still can live on, putting pens in, some use like that. But I did not toss it. So, for you know who you are, who sent it to me. I did not toss it. I'm going to put it, it's sitting right here on my desk. I need to get super glue, and I'm going to put it together. Anyway, come sit on this big fake couch and let's enjoy this. This is going to be so good. And what an interesting story. Who was the last one to meet their end at the end of World War I on the Western Front? Let's do it. Shall we? Yeah, I think we shall. Let's do it.
It was just a few strokes of a pen in an old rail carriage near Compiègne in the early hours of the 11th of November 1918, which signalled an end to years of destruction on the Western Front. During that time, close to 9 million men had lost their lives. But who was the last to fall?
9 million.
In this video, we'll count down the hours, minutes and seconds and follow the fate of those men who were destined never to see the end of the First World War.
Last to fall.
By November 1918, the outcome of the war on the Western Front had long been clear. The German army's last major defensive positions had been shattered as far back as August, and since then, in an offensive known as the 100 Days, the Allies had relentlessly pursued the Germans at every opportunity. This return to open warfare had been extremely costly for all involved, and losses so close to the end were all the more painful. And so, when on the early morning of the 11th of November, news finally arrived that fighting would come to an end, millions of men drew a collective breath of relief. Just a few hours to go. First, let's explore the relative positions of various Allied nations as they approached 11 a.m.
I don't know how I feel. I guess you have to set a time. At this time, it's going to stop. And there are reasons for that, I'm sure. None of which have popped into my head of why you couldn't just, and I look to all of you to give me that information, or why you can't just say it's over. You know, start sending out the messages, stop. You know, to say, okay, it's over, but we're going to keep going for another couple hours or half day or whatever. And at this time, we'll stop. I'm guessing it's because they need to get the word out. Communication can be difficult at this point. Why can't you just say it's over and start sending the word out? You know, and hopefully, you know, I imagine you have to prepare for the end. So things have to be done, and so you set that time. But it's just the whole idea of, if you're a loved one of this person, and even the people who were, you know, dying at the end, you know, leading up to this 11 a.m. time, just so it would be so hard to take, I guess, lack of a better word. Just knowing that it's over. You know, why are we still shooting? So, yeah, just hard.
In the north, the Belgian army, after years of holding positions around the deadly Issa sector, was on the advance, with leading units pursuing the Germans across this ground around the city of Ghent. To their south, the war-weary British were advancing across terrain they had last seen in those early days of the war, and were, by now, advancing on the town of Mons, the scene of their very first engagement in the summer of 1914.
Yeah, that sounds
In the
familiar.
lead were cavalry, and the infantry of the highly regarded Canadian Expeditionary Force. Further to their south, the major player of the Great War, the French army, were now pushing forwards towards the German border, crossing their devastated homelands and liberating thousands of their own compatriots each day. And between those French armies, having fought through the Meuse-Argonne, were the doughboys of the American Expeditionary Force.
Doughboys.
Despite the relatively short time they'd spent in large numbers on the Western Front, their contribution had been significant. Across the ever-changing front lines were some 185 German divisions, starving, bloody and bone-tired. In most cases, they were desperate to see the end of a war which had claimed millions of their countrymen's lives. And so, as the sun rose shortly after 7 AM on the 11th of November, the Allies, mostly unaware of the armistice signed a few hours earlier, planned to continue their advance. But this begs the question, with the war so nearly over, why attack at all on that day?
Exactly.
Well, the answer simply and tragically is why not? The need to continue to drive the enemy back, seize advantageous ground and deplete their opponent's resources was the same as it had been for years before. Even after news of an armistice began to trickle out to the front lines shortly after dawn, plans to advance were still made. We should remember an armistice is not an end to fighting, but rather a pause. Although we know it today, in November 1918, nobody knew that the fighting on the Western Front would never restart. And so, cold-blooded as it might sound, the orders for units to capture this ridge or deploy on that hill in the final moments before the armistice did make some sense. If the fighting did restart, holding a tactically superior position would be a real advantage.
Okay. Now, yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. It's just really technically a pause. So, and, you know, you figure the way things have been, that it wasn't going to really end until one side was completely destroyed, I guess. And so they just kind of figured, you know, when it resumes, we want to be in the best position possible. Gosh, yeah, I didn't even think of that.
Sadly, though, as with everything in the Great War, these moves came with a cost.
Yeah.
All told, some 2,000 men lost their lives on that very last day of the Great War on the Western Front, some tragically close to 11 AM. So with a few hours to go, let's move north to the British sector around Mons to follow the advance. It was in this very area at approximately 9:30 AM that men of the 5th Irish Lancers found themselves, their job being to probe eastwards to ascertain the location of the German rearguard and to maintain pressure on the withdrawing enemy. Amongst their number was this man, Private George Edwin Ellison. So what do we know about George? Let's turn to the available military records at Find My Past to find out more. By inputting George's full name and known details, we find a huge array of records. First off is the census of 1881, which shows a 2-year-old boy, a confectioner's son, living with his family in Union Court in the ancient city of York. His date of birth of 1878 tells us that George was, rather surprisingly, 40 years old in 1918. Further searches also show us that George had joined the British Army as a regular soldier around 1902, but by 1911 had returned to civilian life before rejoining the army as a private with the 5th Lancers, with whom he had seen action at Mons, Ypres, Loos and Cambrai, until eventually returning to Mons in 1918. Records tell us that having ridden through the town square of Mons to much adulation from the local population, Ellison and his comrades advanced northeast, passing through the leading infantry of the Canadian Saskatchewan Regiment to continue their pursuit of the enemy. An official report of C Squadron 5th Lancers records the following moments.
2 platoons under the orders of Lieutenant Biggs headed for the Har Forest, where they met with machine gun fire. Another patrol was sent to the north end of the wood in order to try and reach the canal beyond. This patrol spotted German cyclists and, after venturing into the woods, was greeted with more machine gun fire. Lieutenant Biggs then tried to capture the machine gun, but failed. It was 9:30 AM and the patrol left the wood to give way to infantry.
It was in the act of this final movement, one which would have seen Ellison and his men move towards safety, that a single shot rang out, striking Ellison in the chest and tumbling him from his horse. 40-year-old Private George Ellison died on this spot just outside Mons an hour and a half before the armistice took effect, becoming the last of almost 1 million British servicemen to fall to enemy fire in the First World War. About the same time that George Ellison fell, news of the armistice had reached Paris and swept like wildfire through the city. Those who had spent years wondering if their loved ones would return could now, finally, see a glimmer of hope. By 10 a.m, the British population were also aware, with a formal announcement.
The armistice was signed at 5 o'clock this morning, and hostilities are to cease on all fronts at 11 a.m. today.
Less than an hour to go. Time between 10 and 11 that morning for millions of men must have felt like days, particularly for those in the vanguard of the Allied advance.
He may touch on this, and maybe it's not true, but I'm imagining a lot of people are like, maybe you hear that we got 1 hour left until the end of this thing, hopefully, right? And based on, it could just be a pause, but you're hoping that it's ending. It's like, I don't want to put myself in risk. Yeah, there's got to be that feeling of that creeping into your head. Of course, you have your superiors who are saying, this is what we're doing. Move forward and take that hill, wood, whatever position. But in your head, you're like, God, I just don't want to. We're so close to at least a pause here. I don't want, at least this is how I'm, trying to put some rational thought into what it must be like. Obviously, that I'll never experience, but it must have just seemed, that hour must have just seemed forever.
To the north, the Belgian army, like the French, were advancing through their own country, liberating a population who had lived under occupation for more than 4 years. By now, the leading forces had reached the Ghent-Terneuzen Canal, where German machine guns were still in action. At 10:42 a.m, to the backdrop of Belgian cheers of men who were already celebrating the impending peace, 3 men crept forwards towards the canal bank to identify the location of the enemy fire. A single burst hit all 3, including 24-year-old Liège native Corporal Marcel Terve, who was shot through the left lung. Despite desperate attempts to save him, Marcel died 3 minutes later at 10:45 a.m, the last Belgian soldier to fall. At almost exactly the same moment, 100 miles away, between the large towns of Sedan and Charleville-Mézières, Private First Class Augustin Trébuchon, another 40-year-old veteran who had survived the hellish fighting on the Marne, the Somme and at Verdun, was on the move. Trébuchon, as a runner with the 415th Infantry Regiment, had been fortunate to make it this far, as his role of carrying messages between headquarters and the front lines was a particularly deadly one. This day, though, he was armed with good news. Word had reached the men of the 415th that the fighting would stop, and Trébuchon's message was a welcome muster at 11:30 for provisions. Moving forward towards the front lines in a light rain and in sub-zero temperatures, he no doubt still had a cheerful word for his comrades as he passed. Moments later, as he reached the front line, a burst of machine gun fire pierced the air and Trébuchon, message in hand, fell dead. The last of more than 1 million Frenchmen to fall on the Western Front.
That one's tough. Carrying news of a ceasefire, of a potential end. And that's another thing they brought up is these guys, some of these guys survived the whole war to this point. Man, this is brutal.
Back in Paris, 5 minutes after Trébuchon fell, Maréchal Ferdinand Foch, supreme commander on the Western Front, issued the following order. Hostilities will cease on the whole front as from November 11 at 11 o'clock. The Allied troops will not, until further orders, go beyond the line reached on that date and at that hour. Perhaps a minute later, at 10:51 a.m, back in the area of Mons, where George Ellison had been killed, the Allies cautiously continued their advance. By now, all were aware of the armistice, and for most, movement had stopped.
Yes.
Nobody wanted to take risks in the last few moments.
There you go.
Almost nobody. Having been busy clearing houses that morning as they advanced through the villages beyond Mons, men of the 28th Canadian Infantry, including friends George Price and Art Goodworthy, were at the tip of the advance towards the Canal du Centre. But what do we know about George Price? Tracing his burial record, we learn that George hailed from Port Williams, Nova Scotia, and according to the 1911 Canadian census, was at that time a farm labourer, living with his parents and sister. His military service record tells us he was conscripted on the 15th of October 1917, arriving in France the following February. Hospitalised due to gas in September, he had only returned to the front lines in October.
Yikes.
Further official records tell us that with 5 minutes until 11 a.m, George Price, Goodworthy, and 3 other men decided on their own initiative to cross the enemy-occupied canal and clear one last group of miners' cottages, from which a few minutes earlier German machine gun fire had been seen. Reaching the houses and checking them one by one, they discovered German soldiers setting up machine guns along a brick wall overlooking the canal. The Germans immediately opened fire, but shielded by the brick wall, all remained unharmed. Aware that they'd been discovered and outflanked, the Germans began to retreat. Price's patrol quickly entered the house that they thought the original fire was coming from, but found the Germans had exited through the back door as they had entered the front. They were about to move on when a Belgian family in one of the nearby houses called to the Canadians to take care. Against that advice, George stepped out of the house into the street and was immediately shot in the right breast by a German sniper. Pulled into one of the houses and treated by a young Belgian nurse who ran across the street to help. He died a minute later at 10:58 a.m, becoming the last Commonwealth soldier killed in action on the Western Front. At exactly the same moment, 104 miles away, north of the infamous battlefield of Verdun, the Americans too were on the move. 10 days earlier, they had finally broken through German lines in this sector and had been attacking ever since. By the morning of the 11th of November, advances were still being made in large numbers, including by the doughboys of the 313th Infantry Regiment, Baltimore's own. Amongst them was one Private Henry Gunther. According to his draft enlistment card of June 1917, we learn that Henry was from Baltimore, Maryland, and a general bookkeeper before the war. Following his early years, we also learn from the US Census of 1900 that his parents' place of birth was in fact Germany, adding a powerful layer to his story. Available information also tells us that Henry had been promoted to supply sergeant after arriving in France, but a letter home in which he criticised the miserable conditions had seen him demoted and moved onto the front lines. It's quite possible that this demotion, which Henry took very badly, played a role in his tragic end. Further records tell us that Henry and the men of A Company 313th had marched, bayonets fixed, through thick fog across a marsh at 9:30 that morning towards the tiny village of Ville-devant-Chaumont, at which time German artillery had opened up, killing some of Henry's comrades. Nevertheless, they pushed on, reportedly taking their objective and finding cover in a shallow ditch facing the withdrawing Germans. Less than 20 minutes to go. It was at 10:44 a.m. that a breathless runner finally reached Gunther's small group, reporting that an armistice had been signed due to take effect in a few minutes' time. Opposite them, clearly visible guarding the road on the outskirts of the village, were 2 German machine guns. We'll never know Henry's mindset in those final moments as the men around him looked on, but we do know what took place just seconds before 11 a.m.
Seconds?
Suddenly, Gunther jumped up and charged the machine guns. His fellow soldiers shouted for him to stop, as did the Germans. In fact, the machine gunners stood up and waved, urging him to turn around.
Oh my God.
Then, Gunther fired a shot. The Germans had no choice. They fired back in a 5-round burst. One bullet struck Gunther in the left temple, and he fell to the ground. Those who were there swore that the rumbling of artillery stopped the very moment his body hit the earth.
Wow. to be an eyewitness to that. It's almost like he kind of gave up in a way. And he was like, screw it. You know? Just don't know what was going through his head, but what the heck, man?
Henry Gunther of Baltimore holds the tragic distinction of being remembered as the last Allied soldier to be killed in action on the Western Front, losing his life literally seconds before the armistice came into effect.
That's terrible.
Today there exists some controversy about the actual location in which Henry Gunther fell. Official records state that Gunther was killed and buried in an isolated grave at coordinates E332.6, N280.6, which when overlaid onto a wartime trench map is to be found right here. Though today, a memorial stands reportedly on the spot where Henry fell, some 1.5 miles away here. Perhaps we'll never know the exact location. But there is one more nation we need to consider when telling the story of the Western Front that day. Germany.
Yeah.
Approximately 18 miles northwest of where Henry Gunther was killed, north of the town of Stunne, German troops were stationed opposite men of L Company, 356th US Infantry Regiment, who had been engaged in bitter fighting all morning, during which time the regimental phone lines had been cut, leaving them unaware that an armistice was coming into effect.
Dang.
Sadly, Lieutenant Thomas of the 19th Uhlans had been informed, and when shortly after 11 AM he emerged from his positions to approach the Americans to ask if all was over, rather than a welcome, he received a gunshot, which dropped him dead on the spot. Officially the last German to be killed in action on the Western Front. But was he? In truth, probably not. The popular picture of the armistice is one where at 11 AM all firing immediately stops and no further action takes place. The reality, of course, is far less clear-cut. It's true that in most places a mix of relief and jubilation reigned, on both sides, as these remarkable scenes taken on the battlefield at that historic moment show. But in a few areas, the fighting went on.
Yeah, they probably had no way of knowing. Or they just didn't care. I don't know, but I imagine there's some places that couldn't get the information. Had no way of telling what time it was, maybe. I don't know, but seeing those scenes of them coming together makes you obviously happy to see it. But the guy looking, it's tragic. The German who got up to say it's over, we're done, and all this stuff, and the Americans shot him, and not knowing or not caring, who knows. Probably not the smartest thing to do, even though you're saying it's over. And, I wouldn't be jumping out of my trench at that point, but oh my gosh, this video really hits hard because it's so many things so close to the end.
One British cavalry captain of the Oxfordshire Hussars to the southeast of Mons wrote the following in his diary.
At 11:15, it was found necessary to end the days of a Hun machine gunner on our front who kept on shooting. The armistice was already in force, but there was no alternative.
Right.
Perhaps his watch was wrong, but he was probably the last German killed in the war. A most unlucky individual.
And we should reiterate here that just because the guns had stopped firing doesn't mean that the losses would stop. In other theatres around the world, fighting would go on for days, weeks, and even months. And on the Western Front, many men wounded in those final days would die in hospitals, their families receiving the dreaded news as their neighbours celebrated peace in the streets. The story of the last to fall has always been and will remain a powerful one. The idea of surviving the carnage of one of the most destructive wars in the history of mankind, only to die in the last few moments, is extremely powerful. There are many places where that story can be told, but perhaps the most poignant, from a British perspective at least, can be found here, at Saint-Symphorien Military Cemetery. In these peaceful surroundings outside Mons,
Beautiful.
by a strange quirk of fate, lies Private John Parr, generally acknowledged to be the first British soldier killed in action on the Western Front.
First. Wow.
Directly opposite him is George Ellison, the last British soldier to fall. Two graves separated by 10 steps and 1 million lives.
Oh.
Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. We hope you found it interesting. We want to offer a special thanks to our partners, Find My Past, whose records prove vital in understanding the story of the last casualties on the Western Front. For those with their own family connection to the First World War, it really is an incredible resource, offering an extensive set of military records that encompass a global perspective, making it a key source for military records online, regardless of nationality. If you'd like to trace your own family history in war or peace, we'd highly recommend it, and by using the promo code BATTLEGUIDE you can support us and get a great discount on selected subscriptions. Find out more in the description below. That's all this.
Oh my goodness. That one really cut you deep. Knowing maybe not so much of the American, because the Americans came into the war so late, but the French and the British and the Belgian and the German guys who were there since the beginning. You survive, some of those guys survive the whole war, and then they get right to the end, and it's just, and that last story of the guy, what else are you going to do about the German machine gunner who either refuses to quit or what? I mean, just... But that last thing he said, I'll never forget. 2 graves separated by 10 steps, and also 1 million lives. Wow. That's deep. Oh, what a great video. Again, Battle Guide, you knock it out of the park. Just excellent. Well done, Linus and your team. Please, everyone, below me here, there are links that will take you to this video to where you could watch it again without me yapping, which I encourage you to do. Hopefully you watched it before, before you listened to me talk. And the other link's going to take you right to his channel. Get over there, become a Patreon member, become, a subscriber of his channel. They're so good. So good. And he's got tons of topics. Okay? This is your thing. This channel has got to be in your favorites. For just a documentary, and stuff like that, it's top notch, in my opinion. And I hope you enjoy it. And I know a lot of you do, because I remember the last video, we had nice conversations in the chat and on email about how good these are. So, do yourself a favor and get over there and just get lost watching stuff from his channel. It's important. I hope everybody's happy, healthy, and safe. Thanks so much for coming. Wow, this is gonna last. It's gonna sit with me for a while. I'll definitely harken back to that statement of separated by 1 million lives. And especially since November 11th is coming up here in a couple months. It's always a very emotional time. So this was wild. Okay. Take care, everyone. We'll see you soon. All right. Bye.
Mark from the States, Mark from the States, it's Mark Anytime.